Modern novel are the novel of first half of 20th century. That's a rupture or break away from Victorian tradition. We can say the novel of experimental forms like Stream of Consciousness and later on Symbolist novel that is replete with unfamiliar exotic setting such as in Joseph Conrad's novel or Ford Madox's Ford novel. That novel has different dimensions which we will discuss today. First, for many critics, the years from 1900 to 1945 are the high point in the development of the English novel. A time when not only the greatest 20th century novels, but the greatest novels in the English language were written. The novels of this era contrast markedly with most 19th century or Victorian novels. So first, novelist that get our attention, that's Joseph Conrad, Rudyard Kipling, E.M. Forster, and we can say these are novels of British colonialism or British Empire. In novels of Conrad, Kipling, and Forster, a great degree of subjectivity is found. Of course, objectivity and subjectivity are to be found everywhere. No novelist is only one, mean only objective or subjective. Instead of drawing on an existing world of public values, E.M. Forster, Joseph Conrad, and Kipling felt they had to build up a world of private values. And because of that focus on private values, we can say subjectivity was seen in their tradition. The definite shape of a novel's plot gave way to less logical and sequential modes of organization. There was a stress on the individual sense of what is valid in experience, and techniques of subjectivity were evolved to represent this valid experience. The individual could no longer be a model for behavior, which had been since Richardson and Fielding's novel. Instead of a model, we can say the characters became examples. Since every example was different, so novelists had to find different ways of exploring and describing these differences. What is called the stream of consciousness technique was developed in various ways by writers in order to render directly and in depth the experience of individual characters. Since focus was on individuality, focus was differences of one individual from others, since focus was to present lifelike reality instead of reality projected through Victorian fiction where novel has proper beginning, middle, and end. This novel challenges that you can say established rules or established structure. There was another change, and that was a change in attitude to time, a response towards time. Writers no longer simply wrote, he said, or she recalled, because this reminded of him time was not a series of separate chronological movements. With the invention of clock and clock time, human beings perceived time in chronological linear structure. They became indifferent towards continuous flow of consciousness where past and present were not separate, but past and present were intermingled. So, under the influence of modern psychologists like Freud and Jung, modern fiction writers began to believe that we are our memories, present is some of our past, and that the form and style of the novel have to capture that new understanding. Mean instead of chronological time, there should be a time which is closer to Henry Bergson's concept, who believes that time is like an ice ball put before the sun. The themes which preoccupied many of the major novelists in the period of 1900 to 1930 were themes of loneliness and isolation, and the difficulties of relationship with other individual and with their social and cultural communities. So isolation, loneliness, difficulty of adjustment or be harmonious with society and other partners. Humans are unique individuals and they need privacy. They are also social beings and they need communion. So to social communion and personal privacy, that was a dilemma which was explored in the works of modern novelists. Many writers continue to the tradition of 19th century without making a radical departure from the main themes or from the main forms of Victorian tradition. Rudyard Kipling is its example. His novels, though they have an idea of somehow exotic world, because his novels project Indian societies or colonized societies. But with the exception of exotic East or exotic India, his novels continue the tradition of Victorian realism. Many of Kipling's prose works are set not in England, but in the countries of the British Empire. Kipling was born in India and intimately acquainted with the workings of British Empire and colonialism. Kipling wrote about areas of experience new to literature, that is psychological and moral problems of living among people who are subject to the British rule. That is his, you can say, significant idea, which is seen in his novel Lord, in his novel Kim, in his book Jungle Book, Kipling confirmed the importance and value of an empire and the white man's responsibility, which was ridiculed by Edward Said as white man's burden, to create a single rich civilization among diverse races, diverse cultures and creeds. हम कह सकते हैं कि किपलिंग के नॉवल का सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट ये है कि वो कॉलोनियल अंपायर में जो कॉलोनाइज नेशन है उनकी लाइफ को कॉलोनियल पर्सपेक्टिव से डिपिक्ट करते. We can realize Kipling has similar worth to Indian fiction as Joseph Conrad has to African fiction. Kipling, in spite of his exotic portrayal of India, even our Lahore, that is the subject of his novel King, he remains a traditional or Victorian novelist in 20th century. Galliard School is a Scottish provincial novel that is known for the high sentimental and romanticized form. Most of these novels are not our concern, so I skip provincial novels and Galliard School. When we mention materialist or the novelists who show social concerns, two British materialist novelists comes to our mind, John Galsworthy and H.G. Wells. These are the novelists, we can say these are the novelists who are product of scientific thinking at the beginning of 20th century. John Galsworthy is best known for his Forsyte Saga, a series of 9 novels that covers late Victorian days to the early 1920s and traces the fortunes of upper-class English family who gradually witness the death of the ruling elite they represent. Galsworthy is ambiguous in his attitude towards the family. His initial aim was satire, but his characters became typical figures from the British bourgeois class. So, Galsworthy presents challenges to family. His focus is change in social living and failure of those who fail to adapt and change according to new demands. He is more concerned with material aspects of life rather than spiritual and personal. His idea is that man should not sacrifice this life for the sake of those ideals which are emotional, or spiritual, and they try to deprive man from his material progress. Other materialist novel writer is H.G. Wells, who is known for his science fiction, The Time Machine, as well as his masterpiece, The History of the World. We can see both Galsworthy and H.G. Wells, they were well-read, intellectual novelists. H.G. Wells wrote Kips and the History of Mr. Polly. His characters are generally energetic and positive, and though not always successful in the end, they understand what they need to be happy. He is also known for his scientific novels and emerges as a great science fiction writer, known for his idea of the time machine, the invisible man, and the war of the worlds. His novel Anne Veronica is about social equality or gender equality. There are writers which are occasionally mentioned in your course outline. For instance, most of you will be aware of a story, The Open Window. That's a story we can say about fiction. So that's an example of metafiction as well. A story about art of characterization through character of Vera, Mrs. Stapleton, and that story is written by a short story writer whose pen name was Saki, but real name was H.H. Munro. He is known for satiric and disillusioned view of pre-First World War society that was presented as, you can say, the world of idealism, and it is often contrasted that pre-World War and post-World War generation and post-World War generations are thought by Ernest Hemingway as lost generation. He wrote a novel, The Unbearable Bassington, that is a remarkable mix of social satire and serious content. Another novelist of repute is Evelyn Waugh, who wrote A Handful of Dust. In children's writing, we come across short stories of Jerome K. Jerome. The Stuffed Trout is one of his great story taken from his book Three Men in a Boat. Three Men in a Boat is an outstanding example of humorous fiction. Another humorous comic fiction writer that got wonderful attention in first half of 20th century, that was P.G. Wodehouse. जिन लोगों ने उर्दू में कुदरतुल्लाह शहाब का शहाबनामा पढ़ा हो, वो उनको शायद याद हो कि शहाब साहब के दो फेवरेट फिक्शन राइटर थे, एक थॉमस हार्डी और दूसरा पीजी वुडहाउस. तो पीजी वुडहाउस फॉर कॉमिक राइटिंग एंड Thomas Hardy for tragic fiction. I have mentioned these novelists and their work, but in fact, when we say modern novel, it comes to our mind Joseph Conrad, who is thought the pioneer of Victorian novel, though he was living in a Victorian society and probably of the same age of Thomas Hardy, but he is remembered as a modern novelist, contrary to Thomas Hardy, who is thought Victorian novelist. Second name is D.H. Lawrence, a man who comes with a strange vision of natural life, significance of instinct in human life, and then the novelist of Stream of Consciousness, Virginia Woolf and James Joyce, and afterwards, symbolist novelist. In first half, we see George Orwell, and in post-World War world, we see William Golding. So, if we begin with E.M. Forster, Joseph Conrad, and Ford Madox Ford, we can say E.M. Forster offers a more detailed critique than many of his contemporaries of the social and cultural world of the early part of 20th century. Kipling, I have mentioned, he wrote about British Empire, and E.M. Forster also wrote about India. A Passage to India is this masterpiece, but we can say Kipling is least critical to white man's tendencies. Though he shows sympathy for the colonized nations, yet he shows sympathy for the colonizer as well. But Forster, he presents the barriers in East and West, difficulty of the colonizer to understand the real world of colonized, I mean the India. Forster questions in his novel A Passage to India whether the dualities of East and West, dualities of the Indian people and the ruling British can be truly brought together, or East is East and West is West, and never the twain shall meet. The idea of Kipling will remain true. So we can say E.M. Forster is more skeptic towards the modes employed to understand the world of colonized. In A Passage to India, Forster can admire the detachment of the Hindu mind, at the same time criticizing the inflexibility of the British approach to life. His heroine's response to the openness and freedom of India is praised, but it brings into the impossibility of making a whole out of two different people, two different societies, two different attitudes and religions. He also wrote Where Angels Fear to Tread and A Room with a View, where he contrasts refined English gentility and serious, sensuous Italian vitality. Joseph Conrad, the pioneer of modern fiction, modern novel, by birth was not an Englishman. He became English by choice. He was Polish by race and was born in present day Ukraine, that was part of Russia at that time. So his nationality was Russian and race was Polish. His name was Joseph Theodore Conrad Korzinowski. His Polish parents were Polish, mother tongue was Polish, and he did not learn English until he was 23. He joined the British Merchant Navy and became a naturalized British subject in 1896. So that was his job, through which he got an opportunity to visit the far off islands. He brought to his novels experiences and attitudes which were unusual, unfamiliar for a writer of his time. Though he shares fascination with different cultures, with Rudyard Kipling and Somerset Maugham, but he has more wide-ranging and explicit political insights than Kipling and Maugham. I would like to mention one point. When he wrote his first novels, he shared it with John Galsworthy, who met him on a ship, and Galsworthy actually advised him to pursue his career as a novelist. As I mentioned, he learned English in his 20s. He joined British Merchant Navy, and then he married an English woman and chose an English name for him. His situations are often extreme and test human beings to their limit. Lord Jim is the story of a young Englishman who panics and deserts his ship. Lord Jim later dies an honorable death, but not before his moral conflicts are explored in detail. Lord Jim is a novel by Joseph Conrad. Another novel is Nostromo, which is considered Joseph Conrad's masterpiece. And Conrad is concerned with the effects of his characters of extreme stress and danger in this novel. Nostromo, like many of Conrad's novels, involves the journey towards discovery in a vividly described and richly peopled country of the mind. Themes of trust and betrayal, ignorance and self-knowledge dominate Joseph Conrad's works and will be taken up again in many forms by later 20th century writers like Graham Greene or John Le Carre. Conrad was indeed a profoundly moral novelist, but he recognized the moral complexities of his age, which stemmed in part from the absence of any clearly shared set of values. Conrad develops the techniques of multiple points of view. That is the great contribution of Conrad, use of multiple narrators, idea of unreliable narrator. Unlike Victorian novels where omniscient narrator, all-knowing narrator is seen, here is the narrator that is unreliable, that can be biased, that can be prejudiced, that may have lack of knowledge. So Conrad uses multiple narrators. He also uses imagery and images to evoke his themes. Conrad is thought the best Impressionist novelist. Impressionist novelists don't present exact and accurate details. They present subjective vision of life and they leave behind many clues, many hints that can inspire the readers to think about. So, a very shortest piece of fiction, Heart of Darkness, which is thought a novella, hardly larger than a short story, that is replete with those ideas upon which several novels can be written and had been written, including the novels of Chinua Achebe. Conrad describes a long journey to a place deep inside the Belgian Congo. And that is a journey from Europe or Belgium to the inner core of Africa. From modern world to the primitive world, from the world of enlightenment to the world of darkness, from the world of morals, civilization, and culture to the world of